You know how many people are on right now?
Quite a few, actually.
Okay. So I'll start. So I want to say welcome to everyone. Is the camera set up right? Is this good? Okay. So I'm very, very happy to be sharing this material with you. I'm going to be talking tonight about how to create a Sabbath, how to create your Shabbat. And I at first thought that what I would do is talk about order and Shabbat, because it takes a lot of getting organized in order to have a Shabbat. But as I thought about it more, I realized actually there's several Middah involved, and of course there are many, many, but I picked four to explore tonight with you. How do we actually create a Sabbath for ourselves, Shabbat? And I'm going to start tonight by talking a little bit about our Sabbath observance, our Shabbat here, where it's Jerusalem tonight, and we are Erev Yom HaZikaron, so we're all getting ready for Memorial Day here. And Shabbat this year is always sort of a sobering moment right before Yom HaZikaron, and then on Tuesday it will be Independence Day, Yom Ha'atzmaut. So, and right now there's a lot of music outdoors as people get ready for these holidays. What I'm going to do tonight is talk a little bit about how I came to become Shabbat observant, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And I'm talking about then the four Middah that I want to explore with you tonight: preparing for Shabbat, order. How do we actually stop? How do we actually put our phones down, close our computers, stop doing email? And I'm going to talk a little bit about will, or ratzon. I will then talk about actually entering Shabbat. Once we stop, and sometimes we have to stop on a dime, how do we actually then proceed to enter a time that's a different order of time, a time that is deeply nourishing? But how do we actually get there? How do we stop running around and speeding even in our heads? And I want to talk about the Middah of trust, or bitachon, because there's an act of trust, I think, for us workaholic-oriented Americans. And even if you're not workaholic, I certainly would consider myself a workaholic. How do we actually trust that all will be well when we take this day on? And so a little bit on bitachon, and then a little bit on actually receiving and enjoying Shabbat. A little bit on, I thought about hishtadchut, and the root of hishtadchut translated as sufficiency or contentment. The root is the root of mas'ik, enough. How can we arrive at a point of experiencing enoughness? So what would be helpful for me is I give you an overview of how I arrived here. I would really appreciate your telling me, where are you? Why are you signed up for this webinar? Why are you here? Are you Shabbat observant? Are you hoping to be? Are there some blocks that you have? I would really love to hear your thoughts and questions. Where are you in relationship to Shabbat? And what would you like from tonight, given what I've said that I'm going to do? So, many, many years ago, I was a graduate student, up most nights in the computer center until 1 o'clock, 12 o'clock in the morning. And I discovered that I could not really stop. I would work until I was exhausted. And then I would get up the next morning and work again. I was in a graduate program at Yale University, and I really did not know how to stop myself. I stopped when I was exhausted. I would wake up and I would come back to my exhaustion and my work. I was not an observant Jew at all. I was very, very secular and not knowledgeable about Judaism. But I was invited to a Chavurah where that Friday night they lit candles. I did not know the blessings of the candles. And I had never really been in that type of environment where there was an extension of love and care and profound discussion. And I remember benching at the end of the meal and not knowing what benching was. What are they doing? What is this prayer? I do not know. What is going on? But something happened that night that felt important and attractive. And I went back. And over time, I learned that Shabbat is the fourth commandment and that we're supposed to observe Shabbat. I didn't orient myself to commandments, but there was something about that I took seriously. Now, in Leviticus 19, we just read for our Parshat Shavua, the portion of the week. We talk about being holy, and the commandments that God mentions in that segment of the Bible talks about, there are really two important beginnings to that section, Kedoshim, which means being holy. And God talks about, one, honoring your mother and your father, and two, observing Shabbat. Now, why is it so important? Why is it important to observe the Sabbath in our tradition? So important that it's actually the fourth commandment. It comes right after God's many commandments to put no other gods before him, or her, or it. So I came to learn that one very important thing was stopping and re-energizing and re-nourishing myself. And why is that important? Because it is so easy to lose track of what's deeply meaningful and valuable in life. And observing a Sabbath with others around us is a gateway, is an entry point to deepening our spiritual experience. And that I learned. And over time, I came to Israel. I learned more about Shabbat. I studied. And now we're living in Jerusalem this year, and I have the great privilege to every Friday afternoon to be here and bear witness to a city that quiets down. And it really helps me quiet down. My whole neighborhood quiets down. The traffic ceases. People run to get their flowers and head home. So how do we get this great privilege into our lives? So let's talk about that for a moment. I talked about 4 midot, 4 aspects of Shabbat: preparing for Shabbat, stopping for Shabbat, entering Shabbat, and receiving and enjoying Shabbat. So let's have a look at preparing for Shabbat. I've been studying Reb Volbe. If any of you were on my last webinar, you'll know that I'm reading and translating and studying a well-known rabbi who passed away about almost 10 years ago. But he says, why is order important? The order that exists in the big world testifies to the wisdom of the Creator. This is true also for our little world. It's worth it to establish our own proper order in our life. We should set it up wisely with understanding and knowledge, and then this order will last. So let's talk about different aspects of this right now. In order to bring Shabbat into our lives, it's going to be very, very helpful to make a pattern of it, to make a habit of it. In fact, I've learned over time and experience that it is very, very helpful to have a set series of actions that you take before bringing Shabbat into your life. So, or as you bring, not before necessarily. I would say one thing about learning to keep Shabbat is that it can be slow going for some people. It's not an easy thing. It's a serious spiritual practice. It's available for us. And the reason I'm sharing this with you tonight is I want to really encourage everyone to explore it. If you're not exploring it already, I would really love to help make that possible. So that's why I'm doing this tonight. So what does this mean, really? The order that exists in the big world. So one thing is we understand order is possible because we're created in the image of God. And so we look at our own little world. For example, if you want Shabbat to work, it's helpful to think about food in advance. Why food? Because the food on Shabbat is such a pleasure to have our Sabbath with others in shared meals. I strongly suggest thinking about food in advance and not to make a big deal of it. It's easy to roast a chicken. So here's the order in my life, and you can think about what would work for you. On Wednesday nights, I'm talking about my pattern in the States. It's a little different here, but less relevant. Wednesday afternoon, Wednesday evening, that is shopping for Shabbat. That means Wednesday afternoon is planning the food, not just for Shabbat, but for the week. And then Thursday is preparing to cook or cooking. It's very, very easy to roast the chicken. I really want to emphasize that. To cut up a few potatoes and a few carrots and maybe cut a squash in half and bake it as you bake your chicken. And doing this in advance so that it is all done before candlelighting means that you don't have to cook the whole evening. And truthfully, if that's too much, then I strongly suggest getting food to go. But making sure that you're prepared, that this is preparing for Shabbat. So here are some things we can do. Our order practices, our kabbalot, perhaps, to create this order is do the thinking ahead. Now, I know that thinking ahead is not easy. I do not find it easy. I have ADD, and I find thinking ahead very, very difficult. So one important thing is to find a time, maybe on Wednesday, but if that's too soon, maybe Thursday, and take 5 minutes or 10 minutes to think about what will the food be. It doesn't have to take long. Keep it simple. Another thing to think about is who do you want to connect with? Now, here in Jerusalem, people don't plan their Shabbat meals before Tuesday. That seems to be sort of Tuesday or Wednesday, you need to have your Shabbat connection set up. But it's not like that, at least for me at home in Brookline, Massachusetts. We have to do this sometimes weeks in advance to make sure that we have people to spend Shabbat with. So thinking of the people, and it really could be anyone whom you enjoy. Right now, in the beginning, plan to spend time with people that you enjoy spending time with. Think about the food. Now, one of the great pleasures of Shabbat is the conversation. These conversations are not easy. It's not so easy to have a high-quality conversation because we're not so used to it. We're not used to having it. And so what's helpful in advance, whether or not it's connected to the Parsha, is to say, here are some 1 or 2 themes we can discuss. From last week's Parsha, we could say, what does it mean to be holy? And that might be enough. We had a conversation at Shabbat lunch about what does it mean to put a stumbling block in front of the blind? How is it that we often make life harder for others without even thinking about it? Aren't we all blind in some way? Don't we need the people around us not to make our lives harder for us? Well, that could be a good conversation. But it's helpful to think about it in advance, or perhaps Shabbat morning you think of something that might work for you. And then thinking, where will you go to shul or synagogue or not? Perhaps you'll go on a hike. Perhaps you'll spend Shabbat morning meditating. But as part of preparation, thinking about what will you be doing that day? So these are some things to think about in your preparation. So the next slide is, let's talk about will. And let's talk about how do we stop? How do we actually stop for Shabbat? So let's talk about will for a moment. Rabban Gamliel said, make God's ratzon a your ratzon, so that God will make your ratzon, your will, as God's will. So surely getting some kind of Shabbat into our lives is going to be very helpful because God said so. Whatever relationship you have to God in the Jewish tradition, wherever you are on your journey, I think it's helpful to know that there is something about this day of rest that can transform your life. There's something about this day of rest that enables us to experience more freedom the other 6 days of the week. It's paradoxical because we're going to limit our freedom. That is, we'll set aside our computers perhaps and our phones perhaps, and we won't go on Facebook or Twitter. We're going to leave those things aside and say, well, that's too constraining. I don't want to do those things. But if you can allow God's will to be your will, then you may be on a journey to seeing that these restrictions enable you to experience more freedom, not just on Shabbat, but during the week. So, will practices, stopping. I wrote over time here because I think this takes practice. I was reading something recently about someone who put down her phone for Shabbat for the first time. And the word she used to describe that experience was excruciating. So when we just start getting started, we need just an enormous amount of desire and will to have Shabbat in our lives. Because that moment of putting down the phone is excruciating because we're so used to it. It's our way of connecting with the world. We're available. We're texting. We're on the internet. We're talking to people. What happens at first is that experience of feeling disconnected. But if you can wait and enter Shabbat and know that you will feel more connected soon, and you can talk to yourself, because right now this is excruciating, but soon I will feel more connected. With what? What will you feel more connected to? Yourself, with the people in your immediate environment, with your face-to-face world. A friend of mine says, I disconnect globally, but I reconnect locally. And that face-to-face time is so valuable and so important. So we practice this, and we start to make a habit. Some people talk about will. They say we have a real misunderstanding about what is will and willpower. What we need to do is build habits. And your habit can become so strong, the habit of putting down technology, because it's so valuable a habit, that it will soon override your habit of engaging in the virtual, the digital world. I was talking to a friend of mine today, and she said last week she sent out a big email right before Shabbat. She knew it was Shabbat, but she wanted to get it out, and she sent it out, and all of a sudden she realized, wait a second, that was an important email, and I need responses, and I need to know what people are saying. I need to know how people are responding. And she said, okay, well, I'm going to light candles, and we'll have our Shabbat dinner, and then I'll peek. I'll check. Well, once she lit the candles, they had the dinner, it was like she entered another space. It was no longer important. And I've been there myself. I remember recently saying, I'm working on a writing project. We'll stop, light candles, have dinner, and I never do this, and I don't like doing this, and I don't want to break Shabbat, but I'm going to have to come back and work on Friday night. Unheard of, but sometimes maybe you have to do that. And I didn't want to. It all receded. I was fine. So part of stopping is unplugging and turning our attention to another world, shifting our thinking, shifting our attention. Maybe we take 3 deep breaths and we consciously shift to a text or a song. But right here, it's going to take will to shift. We shift from our do mode, perhaps our complaining mode. We shift towards a way of thinking that is a more appreciative mode. We're going to stop changing the world right now. We're going to move into Shabbat. And part of that is actually slowing the body, slowing our movements. Once we put our digital world down and we put away our to-do lists and we put away our work, we are now able to turn towards entering the Sabbath. So entering the Sabbath takes trust. Entering the Sabbath. I was reading the New York Times, I think it was several months ago. Mark Whitman, who's a New York Times writer, talks about the fear of actually entering the Sabbath. It's scary. And let's just talk about trust for a moment, because we need trust in order to actually enter the Sabbath wherever we are. I strongly recommend to people, start with an hour, then 2 hours, then an evening, then perhaps the morning. Do it little by little. But as you're doing this, hopefully you will build in trust. This is a quote from Jeremiah. 2 evils have my people committed. They have forsaken me, a freshwater spring, Makor Mayim Chaim, to hew themselves cisterns, borot, cracked cisterns that can hold no water. And so as we turn towards Shabbat, we might turn away from the cracked cisterns that we keep turning to almost addictively. We keep trying to get spiritual nourishment from places where there actually isn't any. There's no water there. For Passover, my family and I went down to the Negev, and we stayed in a little hut in a place called Middah. Very recommended. And outside our little hut was a little cistern made of pottery. It was very easy to see that with one little crack, all the water would drain out. So we have things in our lives that we keep turning to to quench our thirst. But I think in our world, we keep turning to whatever it is, work, achievement, even certain friendships, family, but without our freshwater spring pouring water on us, allowing us to feel that deep nourishment and refreshment. Without that, without turning to whatever it is you conceive of as the source of life, as Makor Chaim, whatever that is, we are stuck in a rhythmic pattern of trying to get the spiritual nourishment where there isn't any. So we need bitachon. We need to trust that as we put aside our habitual life, we're going to enter a space of connection, of a different kind of connection. And over time, we might start to feel that. So what are kabbalot for trust in this case for creating Shabbat? Again, slowing down as we enter Shabbat, lighting candles not just out of a mind of habit, but noticing that as we light the candle, we are going through that gate. I learned once that we have two candles because the two candles create a gateway. And when we light those candles with intention and attention, then we are carried through that gate. We enter with trust into this depth of time that we often don't experience during our week. It takes time. So it's not just lighting the candles. We say a blessing over the candles. We come into the part of ourselves that blesses. We remember that we can bless. Then we can sing a song, or make music, or hug and kiss others. All of that combines the connecting with others, the singing of a song, the connecting with music, which for many people is part of the core of their spirituality. Singing that song enables us to enter. We're now sort of crossing a bridge. All of these practices enable us to cross a bridge. And then when you're ready, perhaps the table is set and it's beautiful, and you sit at the table by yourself or with others, but it's become a holy space with challah and wine. And as you keep saying the blessings and entering that shulchan, that table space, you begin to feel that, you can relax now. Part of trust is trusting that we receive help. We receive support. We are not in charge now. We are not the creator. We are not fixing the world. There is a creator. Again, depending on what you believe, perhaps noticing that for now, we are going to let go. So the fourth Middah, with the fourth Kabbalah, is sufficiency. Now, we're going to work on this Middah to really enjoy our Sabbath. It took me a long time to actually enjoy my weekly time off of work. I really felt like, well, my work is what's important, and this is unfamiliar to me. Unfamiliar to feel the wealth and the richness and to have the time to really enjoy myself and my family. So the word histakut, sufficiency. Now we are in a time and place where this is enough. In Pirkei Avot it says, who is rich? Those who appreciate what they have. So now we're going to practice this Middah of histakut, and it does take practice. I remember several months ago we went to a kibbutz, and we were there for Shabbat with not much to do. It was a very, very quiet morning. I don't know, most people there had gone off sightseeing, but we weren't traveling, and we were sitting there, and a cat came up to our little deck in our little room at the kibbutz, and our son, who's 9, said hello to the cat and had an idea of giving him milk. And so he gave the cat some milk. And we watched this unfold. Then another cat came, and Jonathan gave the other cat milk. And the 2 cats sat and purred, and Jonathan got them more milk and patted them and played with them. They were very, very tame cats. And we probably sat there for an hour enjoying this scene, just enjoying the beauty of the day, enjoying the cats and the boys. And it was all more than enough. That was plenty. We didn't need to do special sightseeing. We took a walk. We enjoyed the day. And as we shift into this frame of mind, as we do actually probably change the place that we're thinking from, we can begin to relax into an appreciation of what is. We were in a very simple space, a very small room, a small little porch, out in a bit of nature with a child and 2 animals. And that was enough. And so that is our opportunity to experience a day of enoughness. It's a practice, though. It does not happen automatically. And this is where Mussar is so important to us, I think, is that we can practice little by little, experiencing what some people say, in this moment is Olam Haba. In this moment is the world to come. And for now, we put aside our complaints. That's the practice. And we receive, the word for gratitude in Hebrew is hakarat hatov, the perceiving of the good. So we perceive the good. We make a practice of seeing this moment as perfect. And a practice of naming what we're grateful for right in this moment. You know, when we're running hard and working hard and doing a lot, we often forget that we, most of us anyway, have hands and fingers. Our arms can move. We can turn our head. All of that is immense, just when you think about it. I was having a conversation with my son the other night. Somehow we were talking about God, which right now he's not so into God, but I said, you know, just think about it though. Maybe a little bit of God is in us. And just think, you and I can talk to each other. We can communicate and we have energy inside. That is truly amazing. I never thought about it that way. So on this day, we're really enjoined to think about it that way. Think about the blessing of being able to communicate and the blessing of having hands and being able to walk. And count those blessings. There's Alan Marinas talks about this in his book. Each gamzu, And Gamzu is Gamze, or we might say Gamzelatoiva, or Gamzelatova. This too is for the good. That's a radical way of thinking about gratitude. But on Shabbat, to practice and just think about the blessings in our lives. So what I've done here is look at how can we bring more Sabbath time into our lives. And we're talking about preparing. So preparing is a big part. And then we're talking about stopping as a practice of stopping. Not just doing it once, but viewing stopping with ratzon, with will, to serve God, to practice God's will, who has commanded us to keep the Sabbath. And then entering a Sabbath, and really noticing that we enter. Those candles are a gateway. And then finally, enjoying the time, experiencing contentment and happiness and pleasure. In the old days, the Karaites formed our Shabbat, and there was no fire and no cooking, and it was a very, very constrained Shabbat, very constrained Sabbath. And the rabbis, our teachers, and the people who bring this heritage to us realized that Shabbat really could be a day of pleasure. Oneg Shabbat, the pleasure of Shabbat, a day of meeting and greeting and love and food and real enjoyment. And so that is our inheritance. That is our Yerusha, our inheritance. We can all have that every week. And over time, we can have it more and more and deeper and deeper. So what I'd like to do is see if there are any comments or questions right now. You can type into your chat box. I'm not seeing any comments or questions. I'd really love it if you have anything on your mind or offer that to me. That would be great. Otherwise, we'll bring this to a close.
Can you hear me, Marilyn?
I can. Hi, Eileen.
Hi. Thank you very much. I really have enjoyed listening to you.
Great.
I just wanted to add, I practice Shabbat basically with a Friday night meal, and I've been doing it for years. And sometimes it carries over to Saturday morning, and I attend a Saturday morning Shabbat service. But I must say that when something happens and we're pulled away from that, we seem to feel very unbalanced. And I realize that under your heading of order, doing something like that on a regular basis, that is so enjoyable. It's really worth making a commitment to, because it does add to sort of the calm and balance of your life.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
The very first Middah has to do with making a commitment.
Yes.
And that's beautiful. Thank you.
Dr. Paul, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi there. I'm Jeff. I'm in San Diego, by the way. So I have thanks for a wonderful presentation. I enjoyed it, and I gained some interesting insights to share. So I appreciate that. But I do have a question. So much of our communication that is with people who may be family, or even not family, but not part of a committed religious community, and if you want to say, they may not appreciate the fact that you're putting a new sense of obligation to commitment of ritual ahead of their needs to be able to communicate. I don't know if I expressed that very well. But,
I'm so glad you said that. I think what you're saying is, in some ways, it doesn't work in many communities for us to put down our phones or close email. People want to be in touch with us. I think that's absolutely right. I still think there's a way, let's just say you have a smartphone and you stay in touch with people that way. I think there's a way to change. Part of Shabbat is it's a different type of time. So maybe there's a way that you say, I'll be responding less quickly. Of course, always in an emergency, you want to be available. But I also think that little by little, I don't think we can jump into a Shabbat just sort of now I'm 24/7 and boom, I'm 24/6. But little by little, by just talking to the people who are most important to us and by sharing what is important to us and maybe including them in our lives in different ways, little by little, I think we can still have Shabbat. And look, maybe it's not unplugged.
Well, that's the thing I'm thinking. I'm trying to balance this. Like, I'm away every Shabbat taking care of a little congregation that I serve, and most of the time the family gets together back here for Shabbat dinner, even though it's not it's not Shomer Shabbat in each church in the imagination. And I look forward to the kids will call me and say, Papa, Shabbat Shalom, we're eating all your kava, all this kind of thing. It makes Shabbat special for me. However, it really takes it outside of the realm of really following the rules, kind of.
Yes, I think that's so important in our world, when we're not inside a Shomer Shabbat community, to find ways to make this work with great intention, to connect at a deeper level, to open our hearts to greater love, because we're so rushed so much of the time that we can forget what's important. And to me, that is the most important thing, that we have time during the week to remember who we are at a deep level and remember what's important. So I'm so glad you brought that up. It's really important. For many of us, we're not going to have a halachic Shabbat. That's not what's going to happen. But it doesn't mean we can't have Shabbat. We can.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Is there one more question or comment out there? Don't be shy. This is such an important topic to all of us to really learn together how to do this. I'm working on a book right now. My first book was It's Hard to Make a Difference When You Can't Find Your Key. And my book now is An Oasis in Time, drawing on Sabbath wisdom to create our weekly day of renewal so that we can pool our wisdom. And even if we're not going to have a Shomer Sabbath, we can still have Shabbat, and we need it. Okay. So is there one more comment? Okay, I want to thank everyone for, yes? Hello?
Yes, Marilyn, I have a question about the relationship of sufficiency and celebrating enoughness and gratitude with the idea and importance of hope, and that Shabbat also demarcates the hope for the next week as well. And I was wondering if you could expand on that a little bit.
Well, tell me a little more, in your view, what does hope mean in relationship to Shabbat from your perspective?
We celebrate Shabbat every week, and this is Marion from Boston, so I think you. Hi. I struggle with sufficiency and enoughness, and so as part of my Shabbat ritual, I also hope for continued moments of experiencing enoughness and plenty and gratitude throughout the week. And so there's a hopefulness in addition to an appreciation.
Oh, I love what you're saying. I think that one of our teachers, the Scott and Matt, talks about one reason to celebrate Shabbat is so that we can carry that experience into the week. It's not, we don't want to think about, now we're rushing, we're crazy, and now after 6 days of that, we stop, and then we have our Shabbat, and then we go back out into our busy lives. Rather, this is a spiritual practice so that more and more we can bring those experiences into the week when suddenly I'm not just enjoying my son and the cats and the milk, but all of a sudden my mind shifts almost unbidden during the week. And now I see a cat and just for a moment I relax. We struggle, all of us, with so much stress and such a deep need for relaxation that as we take that renewal, that menucha, that rest on Shabbat, and we really bring it into our core, we can experience more of it during the week, and we really need that. We really need that. So I thank you so much for bringing your comments. I think that's very, very helpful. Okay. Well, I want to thank everyone for coming today, I know in East Coast it's noon. I guess it's probably 1, almost 1 by now. And it's getting dark here. And I wanted to let you know that I blog about Shabbat. So if you ever want to check into my website, it's www.marilynoff.com, and I blog about what I call the Sabbath solution to so many of our ills. And I would certainly welcome you and would love to hear from you and any comments that you have. So again, thank you to everyone for coming. And I really hope that perhaps over the summer, deepening your Sabbath, and so many of you are Sabbath observant in some way, and maybe just taking one more little step, a little bit of Shabbat morning, an even more peaceful Shabbat evening, Erev Shabbat, Shabbat dinner, just taking one little step and deepening your Middah with respect to that step, and so that we continue on our Mussar way with just the wonderful practice of becoming more and more of a mensch and more aware of our blessings, and just an easier person to be around. So thank you all very much.